There's a place He comes to me. Though I'm blind, He helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see Him face to face.
This is Kurt Kaikkonen, pastor of Calvary Chapel, Waterford, at your neighborhood church. Today on Face to Face, we'll be in the book of Genesis. So grab your Bibles and let's get started. If you want to hear this complete message in its entirety, go to yourneighborhoodchurch.com, where you can download Your Neighborhood Church app at the App Store.
And he has all these promises given to him from the Lord about his descendants being given this land of Canaan and all of God's blessings. But the one thing God never told him to go to Egypt. Egypt was his own idea. So instead of trusting God, that God will provide for him through this famine, Abraham is going to help God out with God's plan for his life. And so this father of faith, he still doesn't have perfect faith, because God is still working out faith in his life. And we'll see that going to Egypt, it only causes problems for Abraham. Because you have to remember, Abraham's also a stranger in Egypt. And the other problem is that Abraham has a really pretty wife. Sarah, she may be older. She's about 60 years old, but she's beautiful. And when the Bible says someone's beautiful, they're beautiful. And you have to remember, these people lived longer. Like Abraham, he lived to like 175 years old. So being 60, maybe she looked like she was in her 30s, maybe kind of like Rebecca, where Rebecca looks like she's in her 20s. But the thing about the Egyptians, they're not known for being a very moral people. What they are known for is they're known for being filled with idolatry and all the weird kind of stuff that kind of goes with that. But there's one thing about the Egyptians. They did not believe in adultery. So Abram is afraid they're going to kill him, because even though the Egyptians, they don't believe in adultery, they don't have a problem with murder. And Abraham, he's not really confident that God's going to protect him here, because he must have realized that this was his plan, that God had made him no promises in the land of Egypt. And all those promises that God had made him, he left them up there in the land of Canaan. And so he talks to Sarah and he asks her to lie. And so when you're starting to ask people to lie for you, you kind of got to get the sense that you're really not walking in God's will. And so he says to Sarah, he says, "Say you're my sister," which is actually half true, but it's a whole lie, because she's his wife, though she is his half sister. And what Abraham feared would happen, it actually happened. And Pharaoh took Sarah and he put her in his harem. And she must have been thinking, so why did we come to Egypt? This isn't God's plan, right? So Abraham, what he did here is he put his own life above Sarah's life. And she really actually has no choice in this. So Abraham, he didn't really treat her quite right. And what he has done here is he has set an example for his family. And this act of what he does here will show up again in his family, and it'll show up in the lives of his children. Because we'll see this again with Isaac when he goes somewhere. He's gonna say the same exact things, but it won't be a half lie. It'll be a whole lie. He'll just say she's her sister, but she's his wife. And when you read this and you go through it, it almost seems like Abraham, he gets rewarded for this lie because Pharaoh likes him, or at least he likes his wife. And Pharaoh gives Abraham great wealth. And he gave him a lot of sheep, and he gave him a lot of donkeys, oxen. He gave him some servants. And he made Abraham pretty rich. But you have to remember, he's losing his beautiful wife. And you got to wonder, well, because you have to think, Pharaoh and Abraham, they're talking all the time, and Sarah's sitting in his harem, and you got to wonder, well, what the heck is Sarah thinking? Because she's just being used. She has no choice in this. And she's a married woman. And she must be thinking, well, how is Abraham ever going to rescue me from this against Pharaoh and his armies? And is she going to really ever be able to trust Abraham and him leading her in life anymore? And whatever happened to those promises God made? Has Abraham traded all those away? Were they not real? Were they just Abraham talking? And we can see how the Bible never hides the foolish mistakes of its heroes. It shows them honestly. It shows them with all their warts. It shows them with all their scars. But God does save them, because if God didn't save them, well, then God's plan would have ended right there. And God, he has this plan of bringing his son into the world, and he never gives that plan into the control of men. So he watches over his plan. He watches over that plan of redemption for man. And God had to save her before Pharaoh made Sarah his wife, or else it would have always cast a doubt on the legitimacy of Abraham's heir. And we don't know what kind of plagues Pharaoh suffered here. And some speculate it might have had something to do with the conception of the women that may have stopped. They might not have been able to conceive, but they're called here great plagues. And we do know that God eventually brings a lot of great plagues on Egypt with Moses in the Exodus. And we see here that these plagues, it revealed to Pharaoh that she was Abraham's wife. Abraham never told him. God revealed it to Pharaoh that Sarah was Abraham's wife. And all those plagues were to protect Sarah. And in my mind, you would think, well, I think Pharaoh would have probably went and took all his gifts back, but he doesn't do that. He doesn't take he just sends Abraham away with all this stuff. And so you think, well, it kind of worked out. Abraham made out okay. But did he? Because now Abraham becomes very rich, and he has a lot of livestock. And we also see that Lot also became very rich, and he ended up with a lot of stuff. So we'll read next week that they had to separate. And so now we have Lot. He's going to get lost, and he's going to head off to the land of Sodom, which is the beginning of his downfall. And there's something else that they picked up in Egypt. They picked up this little slave girl named Hagar, which was Sarah's maid. And so she came from this little detour down to Egypt. And we'll get into these stories in the next couple weeks. But our applications here from today is, if you've taken a detour, and if you've taken a detour from God's plan in your life, and you find yourself stuck in Haran, and maybe you haven't heard from God for a while, well, what you need to do is you need to build an altar. You need to recommit your life. You need to give your whole self to him. He will do amazing things through your lives. And if you've never had that kind of experience, or where God has revealed himself to you, if you were like Abraham, like he was in the land of Ur, well, we can take care of that today, and we can pray for you, and God can reveal himself to you, and you can do it today, and you can start your journey of faith. Okay, so last week we saw Abraham's call from God and his beginning of this walk in faith that he had, that God had called him to. We saw God's plan for his life. And we compared the plan that God had for his life to our Christian experience, where each of us were called individually by God to a plan for each of us, for our own lives. And we saw last week that Abram, that he struggled with partial obedience, not being able to hear God until he fully obeyed God. So Abraham's Egyptian plan, it failed. And he was chased out of Egypt. He was forced out, and he had nowhere to go. So Abraham, he returns to the place where he last heard God. So he's back to where he had committed his life to God. And he's returned to that altar that was between Bethel and Ai. And that was the last place where God had spoke to him. And Abraham, he starts calling on the Lord again. And that's something we never heard of Abraham doing the whole time he was in Egypt. And the truth is that we can fail like Abraham when we follow our own plans. And it's just like when he goes down to Egypt. And we too, we can drift so far. We can drift so far from that life that God actually has for us, to the point, just like Abraham, where we can't recognize God in our life at all. He was lying. She's my sister. He was pretending to be something that he wasn't. And sometimes we pretend to be people that we're not. And then the things that he truly loved, like Sarah, well, they were taken away from him. And all he had left was a bunch of camels and a bunch of donkeys. Well, go ahead and try kissing a camel or donkey goodnight. And then you got this godless pagan king, the Pharaoh, and he's rebuking you. And you got this pagan, and he's acting so much more righteous than you. And you're a Christian, and you know God. And so if you find yourself in that place, what do? Well, you do exactly what Abraham did. You return to the place where God last spoke to you. So if that was a church, then go back to church. But if the last place God spoke was in your quiet time and your time in the Bible and your time in prayer, well, then go and start having those again and go back to that altar and commit your life again and start calling on the name of the Lord. So Egypt, for Abraham, that was a waste of time. And Abraham, he built no altars in Egypt. And we'll see that Abraham, he will pay a cost for his disobedience. But now he's back in the land, and we find that it's time for Abraham to separate from Lot, his nephew. That's the same for us. Sometimes there's a time for us to separate from others. It's when we can't walk with them in agreement anymore. And we're not talking about married couples. With married couples, you're stuck together, for better or for worse. That's not for married people, but with other people. But when a relationship only becomes strife and you can't walk in agreement anymore, it could be time to separate. And it's better to do it early as friends than to do it later as enemies. And this Lot, well, it's not Abraham's son, it's his nephew, and he calls him his brother. But there are times when family needs to go out from us on their own. They need to find out what God has for them, and either for good or for bad. And when we do examine Lot's life here, we will see that he not only has trouble, but he will also cause trouble. But the one thing you still always have to remember about Lot is that God calls Lot righteous. Lot is a believer. In 2 Peter 2:7, it says, and delivered righteous Lot, who was oppressed by the filthy conduct of the wicked. So Lot is a believer, but now we have Abraham, and he's going to be obedient, and he's going to separate from his family because he was told to do that a long time ago. He was told to do that way back in Ur of the Chaldeans.
You've been listening to Face to Face. Face to Face on this radio station has been provided by Your Neighborhood Church. If you want to help support Face to Face and put this program on other stations just like yours, you can contact us at yourneighborhoodchurch.com or write Your Neighborhood Church, P.O. Box 500, Romeo, Michigan 48065.
There's a place he comes to me. Though I'm blind, he helps me see. Though I see dimly in this place, one day I'll see him face to face.
Tune in again tomorrow at this same time as we continue to go through the Bible.